Hello and welcome to Catholic in America. Today we'll be talking about the seal of confession and whether it should be protected by civil law.
So if you have a vested interest in your sin staying within the confessional, please stay tuned.
So, Father Tom, why are we talking about this?
Well, this is kind of one of those things that keeps coming up in the news every once in a while. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago that this came up in Louisiana, that there were some court cases or at least some challenges on the legal level of challenging whether or not priests had to break the seal of confession if they had someone who was coming to them who was confessing some type of heinous crime, such as murder or sexual abuse, especially of a minor. Recently, there's been some articles that have been coming out of Reuters and I know AP Press and some of the mainstream media sites where starting to see, again, this new trend of people challenging and saying that the seal of confession and what a person tells in confession should not be protected by civil laws. And this doesn't just apply to Catholics. Actually, some of the ones that I've been seeing, been keeping up with, has been coming out of Utah right now. There's some recent articles that have been coming out that the Mormon Church in Utah, who also has a similar sacrament or similar at least confessional seal that we have is that people come to confess to their priest or to their bishop, and that when they're confessing certain things, that there's now this growing movement of saying that priests should be required by law to be mandatory reporters, which I think that it's also understanding that actually priests are already mandatory reporters in most states. As long as they hear it outside of the confessional. But right now there's civil protections in most states that protect the seal of confession, that if a person comes to confession and confesses a sin, is that a priest is not legally required to say anything and to bring anything that has been told to them outside of the confession to the civil authorities.
Right. So some people call it closing the legal loophole. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, that's where they're starting to say. Yeah, that's where some of the conversation is. You're going to see this is no longer, because this is built into the law, but now they're calling that now the kind of the language is that, oh, we're going to close this loophole that clerics have been able to loophole them. No, I mean it was never a loophole. It was part of the law. We have the same, as you know, Father Doug. We have the same classification under the law as a lawyer,
right?
Like
exactly.
As a lawyer.
Yeah. I mean, lawyer can't, can't share, divulge what he hears in consultation. It's the same thing as far as like what they can share and what they can't share. So why would this be so bad for confession though? I mean, shouldn't, I think you could hear the question from people saying, well, I mean, shouldn't you tell someone if something really awful or heinous is being confessed, why shouldn't a priest be able to go to the police? Why shouldn't they be mandated to go to the police or to report something like that?
Well, I mean, I think that if you don't really think about it too much, like you're just like, well, of course, yeah, the priest should do that. But I don't know did you ever see the old movie with Alfred Hitchcock, I Confess?
Yes.
Yeah, so Alfred Hitchcock made that movie about a priest who hears in confession a person who's going to murder, and that the priest realizes that he's going to be framed for the murder, if I remember the story right. Yeah. And the priest is not able to do anything because of the seal of confession. So, I mean, obviously, like sometimes I tell my high schoolers at the school, I'm like, everything which I hear in confession, like, I can't say anything. Right. And they're like, you can't say anything? And I'm like, no, I can't say anything. And what's interesting is
even bring it back up to you. I can't talk to you about it outside the confessional. As a matter of fact, in the confessional, bringing it back up is even, I'm not really supposed to talk about those things.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, and so that's the whole thing is like the seal of confession opens the door for people to talk about things that are heavy on their souls. And really, I think that, on the superficial level, like you hear and people hear, well, the priest said, as you hear something really heinous, like the person's going to go and murder someone, or that there's a case of active sexual abuse, or there's a case of something which is going to be horrible, that this person's going to go off and commit mass murder, that obviously the priest should act upon that. Right. And I think that the average thinker is going to say that obviously that's what the priest should do. But as you know, as I know, like we are not able. Like there's a different code of law that we follow as priests. Like we follow the laws of the land, but we also follow the laws of the church. And there's a code of law, which is called Canon Law, which prohibits us from speaking and revealing anything, acting upon or revealing anything that we have heard in the context of confession. Because at the end of the day, a person who comes to confession is confessing between themselves and God through the medium of the priest. They're not technically confessing to the priest.
Right. And even and I don't think people know this, but even to the point of after someone has passed away, we still can't reveal. We can't talk about, we can't reveal what they've revealed to us in confession. So, I mean, all the way to the grave, their grave, our grave, we can't bring that out and talk about that. And I don't think people really, I think people who are Catholic know that, but I don't think that people who aren't Catholic really know that or understand it, or maybe they don't believe that we don't. Maybe that's the reason why they're like, oh, come on, you guys must talk about this. I mean, what are the penalties for if you or I were hearing a confession and then afterwards you and I started talking about it? What's the penalty for you to tell me what you've heard a confession and for me to hear it and respond to it?
Immediate excommunication.
And what's the only way we can be reinstated?
By showing up at a tribunal, a court in Rome, to be put on trial, right? And then that's we will probably be stripped of our faculty. We definitely will be probably stripped of our faculties. We might be defrocked, right? Which means that we are punitively, our priesthood is stripped, or our ability to function as priests is stripped from us. We have a punitive thing. So like the church takes the breaking of the sacramental seal very, very seriously. And I think that's where a lot of people don't realize or don't like sometimes understand, like the church is a universal institution, right? And as a universal institution, we follow the particular laws of the land, but we also follow our universal laws, which go across the whole world. Right. And so like we have a universal law which prohibits the priest from speaking about anything which they do. And even if the priest isn't found out, let's say that I personally was talking about someone's sins and the Vatican never found out about it, my bishop never found out about it. Like still between my conscience, me and God, I know that I am immediately excommunicated. Right. Like I'm no longer in communion with the church. And that's the understanding of excommunication in the church is that you take your salvation into your own hands. Right. Like I am no longer being held in the hands of Mother Church to be presented to God. I'm now outside of communion with the church. Right. And therefore I'm going to show up before God, not held by Mother Church. Like that's the thing is like most priests, that's the thing is like we had to make promises when we became ordained as priests. And you know this as well, obviously, that we made the promises that we would not reveal or act upon anything that we've heard within the sphere of confession. Right. So I think that obviously from the pro argument would obviously the question is, well, you can protect these people. Yeah. And the question becomes, you might be able to protect a few people, right? Yeah. Even if that's really even the case, because I think that's really, I don't really see that really happening because it happens so infrequently and so rarely. Most people also don't come to confession before they commit a sin. That's usually after the fact. After, that's right. Yeah, so you actually can't even confess a sin, which you're going to do afterwards. You have to confess something which is done before. But regardless, like the whole point of being is like if people knew that there was a chance, even a small chance, a microscopic chance that the priest or the bishop who heard the confession was going to had some possibility of saying something, people would stop coming to confession. Right. And that would place you see the thing is like everyone's focusing upon the temporary protection. Right. Like we can temporarily protect a few people, but like the purpose of confession is not about temporary. That's not the purpose of confession. It's not to provide protection for people. It's meant to be a pathway to eternal salvation. Right. Right, it's meant to cleanse a person from their sins. It's not just provide temporary relief from the shame and guilt. It's meant to cleanse us from our sins so that we have a pathway towards heaven for the Christian who sins after baptism. So that's the whole thing is like, no, like the purpose of confession is not protecting the common good. It's to ensure the salvation of the person who has sinned. Right. And that's what I was going to ask next was what are the repercussions of this? I mean, let's just say that they do change the law and all of a sudden we have to be mandatory reporters
even in the confessional itself. But what are the repercussions for us as priests, and what would be the repercussions of people who would want to, who come to confession on a regular basis?
Well, I think that the repercussions, I mean, our own Bishop Bill Walker told us last year, is that if any of these things were to go into place, like we would have to, as Catholics, we would have to be in civil disobedience.
Yep.
And actually, from the Catholic perspective, like if a law of the land, if a law of a secular government, right, places us into conflict with our conscience, right, between moral law or the church law, like we have to, like Daniel in the book of Daniel, like between bowing before Nebuchadnezzar and the laws of the land, which are unjust, and versus worshiping God, right, we have to choose God. Yeah. And if that means that we're thrown into the lion's den, if that means that we're thrown into prison, or that means that we are fined and things like that, that's the consequence of our faith. That's what the cost would be. So like we would have to be, one, civilly disobedient, not because we want to, but because the civil laws of the land would force us to do so. And I think that I don't think that this, I hope that this is not going to go, that these movements, but you're starting to see more and more of these pushes, but like we would have to be in civil disobedience, which I'm okay with. Like, yeah. I mean, God sometimes has asked his chosen people to stand against unjust and immoral laws, because I believe that the individual salvation, eternal salvation, is more important than saving a few, which really, honestly, at the end of the day, you're not even really talking about that much. You're not talking about saving the few. Like everyone, like we're all mandatory reporters outside the sacramental seal. And so that's the thing, is like, we're still going to report. It's just that mode, the purpose of confession is not to help the civil government, or not even to help individuals in their temporary life. Like the purpose of confession, I mean, it does have a temporary effect, which is good, but the true effect of confession, the true purpose of confession, why we have it, is to free people of their sins.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I couldn't imagine. I mean, obviously the effect it would have on our people is they would stop coming. I mean, they would.
And it would also mean that they wouldn't have access. I mean, they would probably stop. Many of them would stop coming, because there would be a loss of trust in the church, which I really think subversively, whether or not this is the intention of some, although this might be the intention of some, is to dilute and to try to attack the power of the church, and to try to make the power of the church as diluted as possible, because the power of confession is very, very powerful. People people come back to the church after 30 or 40 years, as you and me have both heard. Yeah. Right, because they want the freedom which is only available to them, and they know this through the power of the sacrament, which they also know is sealed. Right. And they know that, and the same thing is like legally within the land. Lawyers, like your counsel, your lawyer has the same privilege, right. And this is the client lawyer privilege. And the same thing is like the lawyer takes care of your place in civil society. The priest takes care of your place in eternal society.
Right. Lawyer couldn't turn over information that he's found. If he believes or knows that his client is guilty, he's got to, provide innocence for him, not sharing, not revealing things that he knows. And even if that lawyer's fired and a new lawyer comes in, that lawyer still is not able to share that information. I mean,
and if he were to do that, all that information would be immediately thrown out.
Thrown out, and he would be punished.
They can't use that, and he would be punished. Absolutely.
Right, and so that's there for a reason. I mean, there's a specific reason that's there for lawyers, and there's a specific reason it's there for us, and it's an important reason. And I think that's what we're talking about now, what we're sharing now. But it would, I mean, no one would have a reason to come to us anymore. Well, I mean, let me change that. If they changed the law, if they made a law, and said that we had to be mandatory reporters, I would think that people would still come to confession just simply because they know that we would not, kowtow to that. I mean, that we would still protect the sacrament of confession. And then, secondly, I'm not sure, how would you know if a priest was keeping something in confession and not reporting it anyway? So, I mean, there's to a certain extent, you know what I mean? There's to a certain extent that even if something like this were to happen, they change the law, and then a court case comes up that the priest knew and didn't do anything about it. In other words, he knew that there was active abuse going on, and he didn't do anything about it. In other words, didn't report it. How could you even prove that priest learn that information besides, I mean, because you're only talking about two people in the confessional. So I'm not even
Correct.
really for sure, there's to a certain extent that I'm not really even for sure what this law, what they really expect to accomplish by this law, except to, hit at the heart of the church. And I mean, with this, I mean, do you think this, I mean, I think I know your answer to this, maybe not maybe not outwardly, but do you think this is a demonic in nature?
Well, I mean, I think that first of all, I think that just reiterating that, I think that all of us, definitely myself, yourself, I know you. I mean, all of us are about protecting people from abuse. Like
Absolutely,
we have been actively doing our best in the church to try to protect people from abuse.
right,
So I think that's our foremost and primary. Like we all recognize that. The question is, to what means?
yeah,
The means to an end, right?
Right.
So what means to what end? So the end of protecting people from abuse, I think, is a good end. The means, like, what do we have to sacrifice to protect people from that? Like, we have to use the means that we are capable of and able to do so without sacrificing the greater good, right? And so that's why we have to recognize the common good versus the individual good. So I think that everyone recognizes, and no one's going to say, even if they didn't, they wouldn't say the opposite, but still, like, we are about protecting the rights of individuals. And that's actually the whole purpose of confession, is to help the individual person. Right. So if we had a case where a person was in terms of that, like, one, it would end up becoming a he said, she said. Like, if the government tried to say and take away the clergy privilege that is protected by the law, which is not a loophole, right? It's protected by the law, which is why changing the dynamics of the language, right, is just a way of trying to undermine it. This is not a loophole. It is a privilege under the law, which is afforded to clergy and to religious institutions that have the confession and have confessionals. So I think that's the first thing, is like recognizing the importance of language and how language, because like you change the language of, say, it's a loophole. It's not a loophole. It's protected by the law. Right. Because the law also recognizes the ability of and the goodness of the church and what the church stands for, of helping people and individuals. Like, this is not about protecting abusers. This is about actually helping individual people. And so, like, if you view the church through the lens of cynicism, you can paint the church however you want it to be. So do I see the possibility of a subtle way in which the enemy is trying to undermine the church? Yeah, I think that. But I think that the people who are behind this, like the individual people who are saying, let's protect children, I think that those persons probably are good intentioned people. I don't think that they're demons in disguise.
No,
I think that they're good intentioned people who see that, no, we want to protect children. But the question becomes also, do they appreciate the church? And many of them, I think, do not. Right. They see the church, and the Catholic Church in particular, or the Mormon Church, whatever it may be. Do they see this as that these things are not helping, or that these are part of the problem, as opposed to seeing that, no, sexual abuse as well as sin in general is not a distinctively Catholic problem. It is a human problem. Right. And it is a massive cultural problem that affects all areas of our culture, because our culture is falling apart into moral decadence. So, like, in terms of that, do I see, like, and that's the thing, is like, do I see the enemy present in some of this? Yes. Do I think that the people who are involved, who are pushing for this, are necessarily friends of the church? Probably not. But do I think that their intentions of trying to protect people are good? Yes.
Absolutely.
If that makes sense. I think it's very careful that we don't demonize the persons who are probably have the good intentions, which I think anyone who has the intention of protecting children, as well as protecting people from being murdered, obviously that's a good intention. But the question is the means to the end. And like, we can't be utilitarian in the sense that we're just going to sacrifice everything because we have to create this perfectly protected society, where that's actually not going to happen. Because even if we did create it where you took away the sacramental seal, priests are not going to talk about it regardless, because we're going to follow canon law, universal law. And two, even if you tried proving it, it would end up being a he said, she said. Because how do you prove unless you start microphoning confessions?
Right. So Father Tom, if let's just say this was to happen and it was to get passed, and this law was to go through, or the law was revoked, is really what would be happening here. What would be the net result? What would be,
I think it would disproportionately harm people of faith. And it would place an unnecessary conflict. This is not a necessary conflict, between the state and religious bodies such as the Catholic Church. Like it would create a hostility, and it would create a unnecessary conflict. Like it's already protected in the law that lawyers are protected. Yeah. And the understanding is that most people of semi-goodwill recognize that people need to have avenues for getting things off of them.
Right.
Like they need to have, it's not just a spiritual benefit, it's a psychological benefit. And actually the other thing is this, is that the priest in the context of confession, if the person who is actually theoretically, let's say that you had a person who was a pedophile or you had a person who was guilty of sexual abuse, the priest or the bishop who's hearing confession can encourage them to come forward and can encourage them to stop abusing. And can do that in a way where actually they still say, you know what, you're a child of God. This is evil. You need to stop this. You need to come forward. And if that's the thing, is like, it's a pastoral approach. Like we're not meant to be police officers in the confessional. Like to a certain extent, we're judges, but we actually have the ability to influence people who are doing things that are evil, that they might actually stop if they can get some outside help. And if they knew that they were going to be reported, there's not a chance in hell they would ever show up.
No.
And the whole thing is like having that avenue open to them where they have a sacred space where they know that they're protected, where they can have a conversation about the horrible, evil things that they are done, is actually a could be lost, is the ability for the priest or the bishop to influence them, not to protect them, but to influence them to come forward. Because that's one thing that a priest can do. He can't make the person come forward with their sin, but he can encourage them to come out.
Right. And what a benefit that is. I mean, what a benefit that is that, the priest can make those encouragements and give them the opportunity to possibly come out of a lifestyle or doing, involved in some sort of crime that they can be encouraged not to, that they may not have that. If confession's not there, they may not have anyone who's telling them, you got to stop this, you can't do this, or questioning them. And that they're coming to confession means that they know that they're doing something wrong. And so, the confession is sitting there specifically for Catholics, although I'm sure you have as well. I've had, non-Catholics that have come, into the confessional, as it goes, we can't give absolution, but we can at least hear their confession.
Well, if they're okay with being reconciled to the church, we can hear their confession.
Right. Correct. So we're not, we would take that away from them. I mean, or it would at the very least be discouraged. And so, this is not a good thing. It's not a necessary thing.
Not a good thing. It's not necessary. I think it's also very naive. I think that it's very naive. Like people who are trying to find a solution to a very complex problem. It's very naive, and it would ultimately be extremely problematic.
Right. Well, thank you, Father Tom, for talking about this subject.
Whatever the original intent for social media was, it probably wasn't this.
Well, I'm sure you've seen this viral video.
And to the B.
Gaming Week Day 3. This egg is the most liked Instagram picture.
Hi. Impressive carrying skills, right?
Okay, so tell me all about this.
Yikes. See what I mean? However, at St. Dominic Media, we found a much better way to do social.
It is a joy, a pleasure to want to spend time with the Lord and with one another.
If you delight in the Lord, He will give you the desires of your heart. And so I prayed Him to send me to the right church. And so He led me to the one that He established, which is the Catholic Church.
So I'm sitting in my quiet space, my time with God, praying for my grandchildren.
Understand that the devil isn't only the enemy of our souls, he's the enemy of our human nature. And so what God has joined, He wants to rupture.
Judeo-Christian values.
You corrected it. Judeo-Christian values. Your brain corrected it. Oh, that's fantastic. Every year, we produce hundreds of dynamic, faithful Catholic videos that reach millions of people, both online and on television. At St. Dominic Media, we're doing the heavy lifting of creating good, quality Catholic content, and we'd love for you to partner with us, either by visiting stdominicmedia.com and following the share link, or by using the offertory envelopes offered by your parish from OSV. Help us sow seeds far and wide as we use new media's potential for good. Together, let us invest in and grow the kingdom.